We were talking yesterday about something, and this sort of relates to what you were saying about Steve Austin, just a little something that can just change the course of your career forever. But really, something else, Steve Austin, I sure remember him saying in an interview, one of the most important things he did, aside from, the name change and the presentation change, was that he stood up to management. And this, I think, was after the Austin 316 promo. And it was something to the effect of he was doing an interview or whatever it was, or a soliloquy, let's say, and the production team, after the fact, were editing out a lot of the funnier things that he was saying. So they were editing out some of the worst language and editing out essentially what was making the productions team laugh. And at one point, Steve goes to Vince and says, look, if you take away this from me, you're hamstringing me to a point that I can't get over, to use the parlance. And Vince agreed. And it's one of those things where I'm sure it's, as you were saying before earlier in the show, it takes a lot of guts to go to Vince and say something like that, not knowing even what side of the bed he woke up in that morning. And if he went the other way, if he woke up on the wrong side of bed, that could have changed the course of wrestling history.
Yes, but here's a factor that probably made Vince a lot more open to delegating that authority and letting the guys get over, or letting them be themselves. Because at the time, Vince didn't even have a choice. WCW was about to put WWE out of business. They had taken the water coolers out of Titan Towers. There was a lot of stuff going on. This is a kind of a repeat of WrestleMania 1, where Vince mortgaged his home and took out loans and stuff to make WrestleMania 1 happen. If that didn't happen as a success, not to mention Mr. T, they had to find him and bring him into Madison Square Garden. Hogan tells that story. We can save that for the Hogan segment. But Vince literally was pretty much, his business was dying. He was getting destroyed. What did he have to lose? That's kind of how Vince Russo became head writer of WWE. He wrote the magazine stuff, and all the stuff in the magazine, Vince famously said, this is what I want the show to be, and held up the magazine. Steve Austin was probably smart enough to know, hey, he's open to ideas, because he's becoming more and more desperate just to get back on track with that. So that's where the safe, like Duke the Dumpster Drosy, all the other TL Hopper, that was the safe era before they just totally did a 180 and said, you know what? If we're going to go out of business, we're going down in the blaze of glory. That's the kind of reckless nature of the product that made it successful. I think Vince was just like, F it, we're just going to do it.
I'm glad you mentioned Vince Russo, because he's another perfect example. So this comes from Jim Cornette, so obviously their history and whatnot. But he said that Vince Russo ended up getting more influence, let's say, in the WWF in early 1997, where there was a Raw that was from, let's say, I think it was Germany. There was one from South Africa that was terrible. Then there's one from Germany, and we're talking production levels here, just terrible, not TV worthy. And Vince Russo, everyone thought it was going to be a bad idea, but Vince Russo was the first person to stand up and say, this sucked, I knew it was going to, and I'm sure Vince will correct me if I'm getting it wrong, but basically saying, you should have listened to me, or you should have listened to whatever. And Vince McMahon heard that and thought, well, he gets it. And that's when he ended up getting more influence and eventually becoming head writer. So it's one of those things like Steve Austin or any number of people, is you've got Vince at the right time, you've put your case forward in the right way, and you're rewarded for it. But so many times it can go the other way.
Absolutely right. I think that was Journey. It was definitely an international Raw that the production was. It looked worse than a house show from what Vince Russo had told me with that. I would say this, this is how you temper it with that version of Vince. I think as time went on, he became a lot less open to any kind of feedback or suggestions. But the thing you do with Vince is, and I learned this after the fact as I became more mature and saw it, with Vince, you have to complain to him and give him feedback about this particular segment, show, promo, whatever it might be, to protect his business, to protect his vision. You're on his side trying to help him. If you come at him and say, dude, you're stupid. Who wrote this when he wrote it? You're done. That would be the advice I would give people. I'm protecting your product. I'm protecting your vision. And he's like, okay, you know.
I think that probably, actually, mentioning Russo again, I think Vince, as far as I can tell, obviously I was never in the company, I'm just an outsider looking in, it's when Russo left, that's when Vince McMahon seemed to be tightening the reins more. And I've heard that from subsequent writers. And between like 99 and the mid-2000s, the culture of autonomy in the WWE had completely changed to now everything has to be run through Vince all the time. And once again, if he gets up on the wrong side of the bed, he could just screw it up and throw it in the bin. And then you're back to square one.
Well, people have a lot of opinions about Vince being lack of empathy, lack of emotion, lack of feelings, and those could be true at the same time as what I'm about to say. But remember, Vince also gets hurt. When Luger left and showed up at Nitro without any notice, as he was, I think, working a tag match on their TV with Davey Boy, that hurt Vince. When Savage left, I think it hurt Vince, like on a personal level. When Russo left for WCW, which was based on the nanny speech that Vince gave Russo, so it wasn't unwarranted for Russo to say, I want to go to WCW where I can spend time with my family, and they're offering me a ton of money. But Vince at that point said, probably on a personal level, I'm never going to trust another writer again. I'm never going to give somebody that kind of power, because what if they leave and they give away the secrets to WCW? That makes a little bit more sense, I think.